Thank you for you guys coming out here. Really appreciative for David to give us some time and let me talk to him about what he's doing and, of course, his massive background. My name is Kurt Kumar. Some of you have probably known me from BlockCon. I don't have the clicker, but I wish if I had the clicker, I can quickly go through it. I help out with security token offerings and utility token offerings, obviously, and that's my day job, and do some marketing, and in the evening we run conferences. And David Chaum here, everybody probably already knows his background. So David, let me just get started. Oh, thank you. Okay. Well, I guess you guys can see that. Well, I'll just backtrack a little bit. Some of the things that people constantly ask us, hey, how do we do a one-pager? How do we do offshore entities? So this is like a McDonald's normalized menu card. You can just come up to me and say, hey, I need number 2, and the prices are there. So, ask for that kind of a transparency with other service providers. But David, I know you wrote the paper in 1981 about email, and that kind of laid down the foundation for anonymous, transactions and communications. How was the field back then? I mean, we feel today we are like, we have all the resources, but back then, how was it?
Well, Kurt, it's a pleasure to be here and to see all these great people, and I've run into a number of people already just walking in here, but that was very, very different. You wouldn't, of course, have a crowd like this, and probably I was the only person working on privacy in messaging for at least a decade.
Right.
So I published that article. It appeared as a technical report in '79, and then in '82 it appeared in the Communications of the ACM, which was like the best journal of computer science at the time, and it was my master's thesis and so on. And I open sourced it, and there were a whole series of implementations of it that were volunteer, and then it was commercialized by a company called Zero Knowledge Systems that then went bankrupt after a while or whatever, and then Tor emerged, and they've implemented a very poor version of what I proposed. So it doesn't really effectively protect privacy because of the very limited number of hops and other issues. So that's brought to you by the U.S. government, in case you haven't noticed, for more than a decade. So, of course, they only care about your privacy. So it's kind of a honeypot, right? It makes it easier for them to see what people don't want them to see. When you open source stuff, it could work in different ways,
right. But how did the conversation actually go? I mean, today when I go to big firms and I say, hey, we are going to have data privacy, the user is in the center of their data, you cannot harvest it, you cannot nefariously mine it, they will laugh me out of the room. And we are talking about this stuff 30 years back, so how was the face-to-face conversation? Did they just say like, hey, you're smoking, quote unquote, or?
I was very much a pioneer, pointing out that the whole game is not, I stayed out of the end-to-end encryption thing very rigorously over the last 35 years.
Right.
Because to me, this is not the issue. The issue is what is now pretty widely known. You hear the term metadata. I think that was coined by the Obama team as a euphemism for what we've always called traffic analysis data. That's the intelligence and military term for it, or the who talks to who and when, to put it simply, the complete social graph. The public is now very sensitized to this being the key issue for them taking back their informational lives.
Right.
So the mechanisms to protect that are, let's say, few and far between, and up until recently, they even were far too slow to allow widespread use in consumer messaging.
So there are a lot of entrepreneurs here, and I'm gonna just go slightly onto your eCash side of the conversation. How did you convince a bank at that point in time? Like I want to give you, I just want
Kurt,
to
this
get.
is pretty fun talking to you, but I can't even believe it. I don't know. I was sitting in in a directors meeting at Deutsche Bank. Now this was the largest bank in Europe at that time.
So let's pretend I'm the
so
entrepreneur.
I still had ponytail and beard. I came in there from Amsterdam.
Right.
And don't ask me how, but they agreed to pay us money to license our eCash software and to implement it, and they did. And in those days, of course, they were Germany used the Deutschmark was the national currency, and this was one of several banks that publicly released eCash. They had their data center was 3 stories underground in this bunker, and they had very stringent requirements about backups and fail-safe rollovers and all this stuff that we had to implement for them. So we had to really industrialize it, and they released it so you could buy stuff online with Deutschmark-denominated eCash, in addition to our airdrop and U.S. dollars and Australian dollars.
Did you use any keywords, any magical words to convince them? Not only did they license your technology, but they gave you money on top of that on something which today any entrepreneur that goes down to Wells Fargo or Credit Suisse or Bank of America, they'll just laugh him out of the room you want us to give you money? Good luck with that.
How serious Deutsche Bank. It's hard to imagine, German culture, and then Deutsche Bank was just kind of like the and the board of directors of Deutsche Bank, that was about as, I guess, there was tremendous interest globally in eCash that my DigiCash company issued, because it was billed as a digital bearer instrument.
Yep.
And so part of that was the privacy. So when you withdrew your eCash into your computer, the issuer, the bank, had no way of knowing what those numbers looked like.
Got it.
And so they could not stop you from spending it, and then moreover, when you spent it, they would not be able to figure out that it was your money. So it really empowered the individual dramatically, and it was something that I made the first eCash payment from the first World Wide Web conference in Geneva. There were 2 keynotes, mine and Tim Berners-Lee. And mine, I made the first eCash payment, and I went out on the patio at CERN, it was like a cafeteria, and I wrote like 3-column paragraph press release, and I sent it back to my office, and like the next 2 days, there were hundreds of articles. It was picked up by all the major media. Out of nowhere, the idea just captivated the interest of, and after that, I would be like, on an elevator or in a grocery store or something, and people would come up to me and say, "Oh, you're the eCash guy." Because
so if I were to boil it down, ponytail, come from Amsterdam, and what would the third one be?
I had a very compelling vision for the future of money.
Vision. Great. So you've been here so far ahead of the curve. If you were to look at Bitcoin and then the paper that the group called Satoshi came out with, and if you were to reimagine that or re-envision that today, what would you think? Would you tweak it? Would you leave it the same? What would you change?
Well, I think that the very first phrase of the abstract of the white paper got it right. I can't quote it verbatim here, but it essentially was calling for distributed electronic cash, just a person-to-person payment system. I don't think that's what Bitcoin evolved into. However, I think we're all grateful and very respectful of what Bitcoin did for the world and Bitcoin itself. But I don't think it's really lived up to that vision, and so obviously you need something that is in order for it to move from the store of value to a real mass consumer adoption, you need something that has a very rapid transaction time of, let's say, 10 seconds. Like,
Right.
You need...
Why 10 seconds? I mean, why
well,
cannot it
that,
be lower than that, or maybe let's say 25? I mean,
well,
I'm happy if I'm making a $100 million transaction. I'm okay for it to take some time, go get my cup of coffee, and I press the button.
well,
Why 10
but if you
seconds?
want it to be a consumer payment system, let me just back up and say, WeChat has proven that what consumers globally want is a payment system that is integrated with messaging, that also includes dApps in the constellation. If you think about it, the browser kind of was layered between the consumer and the operating system. And now the next iteration of this is that WeChat, messaging and payments with dApps, key dApps, is between you and the phone operating system. That's
Right.
what consumers want, and you can see, like, for example, how WeChat's been winning over Alipay. It's because of the integration. All the major global chat systems know this, and they're moving aggressively to try to incorporate this. So I think that what you really want to make is a messaging system that's integrated with payments, and
Right.
then you have to address this metadata, protect the social graph,
Right.
keep who's talking to who and when from being absorbed by the system provider, and that's a pretty tall order.
So I took this slide right behind when I was getting mic'd up, and I took this slide out. It's just basically a payments app landscape. And you can see there's Venmo, there's WeChat. For some reason, I couldn't figure out where WeChat was till I looked at the emoji. I think it should be pretty front and center, and they have Apple Pay in there. My question to you is, we have so many choices here, and I think Apple Pay is pretty 10-second. Venmo is pretty good as well. I haven't, I mean, Uber is, I wouldn't call it as a payments app system, but fine, it allows me to pay the driver really fast. In all of these apps, do you feel there is enough innovation still remaining that it can be made better from a user standpoint?
Yes, what's needed is metadata protection and
Okay.
integration with messaging, and you see it a little bit in your slide, but an integration with key apps like ride-hailing and other things that
But
people
why-
use frequently.
Why metadata protection? I mean, if I go for it.
Well, I've pointed out over many decades consistently, and you won't find anyone else who's been doing that. So if you want to trust someone to try to make this happen, then I'm, I think, uniquely positioned. But you could go back and look at some of the original publications, and we've recently excerpted from them. It's easy to see that there's going to be a kind of fork in the road, a bifurcation. There's only really two ways to go. You can kind of go the way that China's going, and they're taking to extremes in some regions, or you can go the way of personal liberty and dignity and the kind of metadata protection where the consumer has sovereignty over their own information, control over their own keys. There's no effective way to have a middle ground. It's all about information. So either the information, everything about you is available to government or companies, or it's not. And there's only one way to make it not be available, and that is to protect it, in effect, yourself with your own software and with blockchain, because, information has a way of, under a regime change or leaked out, and you never know when it's being improperly accessed. So the only rule of law is not going to do it, in my opinion. It needs to be, and if it was illegal to misuse it, then why not just effectively protect it? Because finally the technology is fully capable of allowing consumers to protect their own information. You know, when I wrote this article, it finally appeared in the early 90s in Scientific American. If you look there, you'll see what looks like a smartphone. Because part of my original vision in the 80s was that people would carry around, in effect, a smartphone, and they would use it to protect their information and in their interactions
Right.
with organizations. Finally, now the technology's here where we can really do that without even noticing. It's kind of like the Maslow hierarchy of needs, which most people have run into somewhere. If you translate that into the information technology world, then you could say that, well, we had first computers weren't reliable and everything, and then now, okay, they're reliable and reasonably inexpensive, and now with smartphones they're mobile and handy and they can do all these apps and everything that people want to do.
Right.
Well, then the next layer above that is to protect individual sovereignty, liberty, privacy, your reputation, your control over your own informational life.
Right.
That next layer now becomes a strong need. So that's the whole Maslow idea. Once you satisfy one layer in the pyramid, then mysteriously the next layer becomes a strong need. So we're starting to see that now. There's all kinds of talk in the media about metadata.
Right. So you're saying that there is no room for Facebook, Instagram, and WhatsApp in the near future?
You know, if you look at the history of social media, you'll see how, and anyone who's been around for this kind of thing for a while, you see how quickly the single walled garden or whatever it was that was king of the hill and
Right.
seemed like they were never going to go away,
Right.
was displaced because of what's technically referred to, I think, as consumer mobility. You know, online, it's real easy just to move over to the next system, and then you can bring all your contacts with you.
Right.
And there are technologies that I've developed to allow you to bring all your contacts with you without having to upload them to the new system. So you can, the fact that all this stuff is built out is great, but it doesn't mean that a superior system that actually protects consumers won't be their preference and they won't just move to it.
Right. So I like to usually see the upcoming, like whatever is coming down the pipeline, and try to apply it to, or at least do an exercise as to how it would apply to the real world from that, metadata privacy standpoint. And I know I sent you this article link. This was in New York Times, that how China turned an actual city into a world prison, right? And there are cameras everywhere. There's people who are walking down the street at every couple of kilometers. They will take your cell phone and they'll see if you have installed the government-issued app, which basically tracks your text and voice and data and everything. So how would a society that's currently there, how would we help them? What are their options right now?
Well, thanks for sending me that article, and it's a pretty grim picture. And what I read was that there are frequent road stops
Right.
for pedestrians, also where the police look in your phone and see if you're running their surveillance app and so on as you're supposed to. So I'm not sure there's a tremendous amount that can be done for people that are under that strict of control, but on the other hand, what is happening is that the big Chinese companies, which are very happy to accommodate the Chinese government, are moving out aggressively into much of Southeast Asia, and I'm pretty much informed and aware of this, and so the rest of the world has a big opportunity, and probably if you were to have a system that is quantum resistant, is secure against nation states, and solves the metadata problem and is fast, and has messaging and payments,
Right.
then that could be a strong competitor to these products in the rest of the world, and eventually push back even on those countries that seem to have a stronger grip on technology deployment. But there's a related aspect, which is this so-called VPN. There are technologies that allow people to access information
Right.
that their government doesn't really want them to.
Right.
And to a reasonable extent, that is possible, and there are some tricky new things coming down the pike in that regard. So it's a continual kind of arms race, but I
Yep.
think there's hope that even if in a totalitarian regime or a regime that wants to restrict your use of information technology, you'll be able to do what you want to do.
Got it. I want to spend some time.
Excuse me.
I want to spend some time talking about your current project that you're on. I think it's very fascinating. I took this slide from one of your presentations, and this is the privacy, no privacy, and slow versus fast quadrant. And you have Elixxir listed on the top right
Yes.
corner. Tell us a little bit about, because I believe if Hashgraph, Ripple, Monero were in the audience, they'll probably come on the stage and kill me for showing this slide.
Well, I mean, I've showed it at all the major events around the world, for the last half year. So
Yeah.
it's not a secret, but no one has actually given
how-
any evidence of it's not. But this statement here is stronger than what's shown, because it's not only that the payments is faster and protects privacy, but it has quantum resistance, and it's integrated with metadata protected messaging. So it's actually a much stronger story, but just in the payments, pure payments speed
Right.
and privacy space, our technology really stands out.
How fast are we talking about compared to, like, just from a relative standpoint, like, compared to Dash or Monero, or I don't know if you have some metrics here, like, what
Well,
are we
let me
looking?
just try to help everyone out by clarifying what are, the key figures of merit. How should you measure and think about these kind of issues? Because in the modern world, most representations about performance of products in any space are, misleading at best. So what is the real deal? What is it you really want to look for? So in payments, it's time to irrefutable proof of finality by both counterparties.
Okay.
So that's from initiation of transaction to finality that's provable by both counterparties. Well, very few payment systems even achieve that property, let alone achieve it quickly. And
What do you mean by finality?
finality is a technical term in the payment systems world, just means irrevocability of a payment.
So once it's sent, it's done. I cannot bring it back.
Yeah, so like a Fed wire or like Bitcoin, when you make the payment, there's no
Right.
way to get the money back. So that's when it becomes final. And in the privacy dimension, the figure of merit is what we call the anonymity set size. Cardinality, the number of people that you are anonymous among. You cannot be anonymous by yourself,
By
right?
yourself, that's right.
So with some of these systems that advertise privacy, it turns out you're really only anonymous among half a dozen other drug dealers, okay? So it's not really that interesting. So when you talk about anonymity, there are two dimensions. Just to give you a sense of this, right, there's what I think of as the vertical dimension, which is the metadata protection. Can a particular transaction be linked to your IP address or your
Yep.
phone's identity or something of that sort of your account? That's the vertical direction. And very few systems have effective protection against that. And of course, then the other dimension is the linking from transaction to transaction.
Right.
Yes.
So even though I might be anonymous, if I sent a transaction out and that guy is not anonymous, then you can link that transaction back over.
Well, the really, great thing about the whole blockchain space is that people who are deep in it have become very much aware of these two dimensions of traceability because their own payments are being traced and the tax people are after them. So, forensically, both types of, the IP linking and the transaction linking, which is exposed in the blockchain, are used. So this is, I think, helping people become aware of the need for actual effective metadata level of protection of privacy in payments.
How many of you have done your taxes today, or for this year, or sorry, fiscal year 2018? All right, what happened to the rest of you guys? Still waiting to figure out if they're going to trace you or not? All right, I know you gave me this clip.
Oh.
I want to present it so that at least we can see the Elixxir piece. I'm not sure if I can play the video from here, from my remote, or... Oh, there you go.
Suppose Alice wants to send a message to Bob, but she doesn't want anyone to know that the two of them are communicating. Message content can easily be protected by so-called end-to-end encryption, but this does not protect the information about who's talking to whom and when, the metadata, which is increasingly recognized as far more revealing and more challenging to protect. Each member of a team of nodes, in order to protect the metadata, successively shuffles the batch of encrypted messages using its container of secretly arranged tubes and sending the messages without delay through to the next team member. Even just a single node can keep senders from being linked to recipients. Alice also gets a receipt informing her confidentially that her message was provided to Bob. Team members then destroy their secret pattern of tubes, making way for a new team ready for a new batch. Earlier, each node is chosen independently as a kind of random secret key, which input tube to connect to which output tube. Elixxir's breakthrough over the type of messaging I open sourced in the 80s is a way that enables almost all the work to be done well in advance, yielding the only known way to provide real-time metadata protection smartphone to smartphone. Lead can also pay Yumi by sending what appears to be an ordinary message, but that actually contains numbers that serve like metal coins and paper money. Called such denominated unforgeable numbers digital cash, first issued by DigiCash in the 90s. Elixxir's breakthrough improvement on the original digital cash now makes it fully distributed and quantum resistant. Elixxir thus is able to uniquely provide a new, ultimate metadata level protection of confidentiality in all your online communications and payments. For the first time, giving you a protected sphere, protecting your digital world today and your digital future.
Would the users be paying some kind of a fee to use the application or use the system? Or is it, just like free application?
My intention is, I'm probably stealing someone else's copyrighted tagline, but kids fly free. I mean, every consumer should be able to use this stuff for free. I think that's what people
So what you're saying,
expect.
I should go get kids first.
But I mean, but that's not to say that apps and so on, enterprises won't have to pay some modest amount of freight. But the idea is that, of course, that you never want to charge the end users for consumer services. Make it really easy for people just to switch over.
So going back to that slide, can I go back out of there? Oops, that's Tim Draper. Going back to that, the payments landscape where we had, Apple.
The quadrant,
What's your thought and gut feeling? How are they going to move into the space of metadata protection, or will they
Well, you know, like I said, I've been working on this for 30 years, and I published 35 years. That article in the 79 as a technical report, 82 or
Right.
whatever appeared in the Best Journal of Computer Science. Since then, according to Google, there's over 5,000 references to my original article, and there's a series of conferences every year devoted to this sort of thing, and no one had found a way to speed it up
Yeah.
until a few years ago. And when I saw the way things were revealed to be working here in terms of privacy, I decided to try to jump on it and find a way to speed it up. And I found a way to speed it up by a factor of, let's say, 1,000. And that's what makes it practical to go from phone to phone. So as a technology person, I don't think it's likely that someone else is going to find another way to really protect metadata that will have the kind of, you know, phone-to-phone performance that consumers have expect.
Got it. Well, David, I know our time is up, and they're playing music in the background. But I really appreciate you coming out here and helping us understand your background, and then Elixxir, looking forward to that. Thank you.
Hey,
Much
thank
appreciated.
you, everyone.